Chapter 10. The Chronicles of the Society of Saint Jerome. It was a miserable day, and the way it ended was even more miserable. Upon coming home, Hoggie had a fight with her aunt. Well, it was not a real fight, but it was horrid all the same. Hoggie told Aunt Michel that she knew what and where her mother was, and called her a liar. She expected her aunt to lie more, or at the very least to try to explain herself. But none of this happened. Michel Clares simply burst in tears and ran off to her room, and there she stayed for the rest of the evening. When Prospero came later that night, he found Hoggie in the kitchen, sulking, and Michel in her room, sobbing. He tried to convince his girl-friend to unlock the door and come out of the room for about half an hour. In the end, he gave up, and joined Hoggie in the kitchen. "I brought this cake," he said, placing a carton box on the kitchen table. "Thought we could eat it together, but it looks like you'll be eating it alone, Hoggie."
"I don't want your cake,"
Hoggie replied grumpily. Prospero raised his eyebrows.
"This isn't like you. What happened?"
Hoggie told him. Prospero breathed out loudly, as if he had jumped into a pool of icy cold water.
"Well,"
he said, combing his hair with his hand and making it even more dishevelled,
"I know how Michel feels about it. What about you? Are you all right?"
Hoggie wrinkled her nose.
"What do you think? I just found out that my mother is a criminal, and that my aunt has been lying to me for years. No, I am definitely not all right."
She stared at the acrobat from her seat in the corner, like an angry little ferret. Prospero nodded.
"I understand. It is a rather big thing to learn. But I still think you may be overreacting a little."
"What do you mean?"
Prospero moved his chair closer to Hoggie's.
"Yes, you found out that your mum is in prison, but it does not necessarily mean she's done something bad. Sometimes innocent people go to prison, and sometimes people go to prison because they have in fact broken the law, but the law is just wrong, and shouldn't be a law at all. Have you ever heard about the Dandy March?"
Hoggie nodded. She had certainly read about the Dandy Marchers. They were people in India, who 80 years ago, when India was still a part of the British Empire, refused to pay the salt tax.
"Well," Prospero said, "all those people who decided to make their own salt and not pay taxes to the British government, they all broke the law. But does that make them criminals?"
Hoggie considered this for a few moments. Prospero was right. Those people in India weren't criminals. They were normal people who wanted a normal life.
"And even if your mum did something bad," Prospero carried on, "that does not mean she is a bad person. Sometimes good people do bad things. I should know. I've done all sorts of bad things in my life, especially when I was a kid."
"Really? What have you done?"
Prospero smiled.
"I am not going to tell you."
"All right,"
Hoggie said after a few more moments of reflection.
"Maybe you are right about my mum. But still, Aunt Michel, she lied to me."
"Well," Prospero said, "it's a rather complicated thing to explain to a kid. Perhaps she did not know how. Or perhaps she was not sure you would understand. And she probably was afraid to hurt you. She loves you very much, you know."
"She does?"
Hoggie stared at the young man in disbelief. She could not recall Aunt Michel ever telling her that she loved her. Prospero nodded.
"She hates working at the gallery. You know that."
Hoggie snorted.
"Who wouldn't? Do you know why she won't quit?"
"I do."
Hoggie recalled that Aunt Michel only took the job with the gallery, so the social services would give her the guardianship of her niece. She then recalled that her aunt took on the second job, so that she and Hoggie could afford to rent a flat in a nicer part of London, and Hoggie could go to a nicer school, the Regent's Park.
"That was totally wasted on me,"
Hoggie thought with a great deal of guilt. And then, for the first time that evening, Hoggie began to wonder if her aunt did not tell her all those things because she did not want to upset her. After all, she did not tell Aunt Michelle half the things that happened to her at school. Some of them, bad grades and skipped classes, she never mentioned because she was ashamed. But other things, her run-ins with the bullies and Mary Child's snide remarks about Hoggie's hand-me-downs, she kept to herself, because she did not want Aunt Michelle to feel bad. "All she ever talks about is you," Prospero carried on in the meantime. "Not herself. Certainly not her job, not even her art. You. How smart and how imaginative you are. How grown up, and how proud she is of you."
"Me?"
Hoggie was completely blown away.
"But I'm not even pretty, and my grades are awful."
"There is more to life than looks or grades, and people who truly love you know that." Hoggie lifted the lid off the carton box and peeped inside.
"This cake looks really good. I think Aunt Michelle would like it."
Prospero tilted his head. "Well, she would not come out of her room when I asked her to, but maybe she'll do it for you." Hoggie walked down the corridor to Aunt Michelle's room. She knocked on the door gently. When no response, apart from sobbing and blowing of her nose, came from within, Hoggie said,
"Aunt Michelle, I'm sorry I yelled at you, and called you a liar."
A few moments passed in silence, and then the bedroom's door opened a little, and Aunt Michelle's pale, red-eyed face peeked out.
"I did lie to you, Hoggie,"
Michelle said,
"but I was I didn't." "I know,"
Hoggie said. She made a few more steps towards her aunt, and hugged her. It suddenly struck Hoggie how tiny and fragile her aunt was. "She herself is as good as a kid," it occurred to Hoggie, "and there she is, watching over me." She suddenly felt very bad about all the arguments she had had with her aunt, and all the time she got in trouble at school, and made Aunt Michelle see the deputy headmistress. She remembered also about the suspension, and the forthcoming teachers' council, and felt even worse. It was at that moment that Hoggie decided that if they did not kick her out of school, she would really make an effort to study better, and do all of her homework, and turn it in on time. She still thought the school was a waste of time, but she would do it for Aunt Michelle. Prospero watched the two of them from the other end of the corridor, smiling. "I think," he said, "now is a really good moment for me to put the kettle on." Hoggie did not have the heart to tell Aunt Michelle about the suspension that same evening. Neither did she tell her the following day, or the day after. In fact, she kept postponing breaking the bad news to her aunt the entire week. So as not to arouse Aunt Michelle's suspicions, Hoggie left the house with her school bag every morning as usual. But instead of going to school, she went to the library. There Hoggie would spend the entire day going through the stacks of books she thought they might have overlooked in their previous searches. One morning, Hoggie ran into Jimmy, who was walking around the library with a little cart loaded with the books, and putting them back on the shelves. "Hello," Jimmy greeted the girl. "You're here early. Shouldn't you be in school?"
"I'm suspended,"
Hoggie explained.
"but don't tell anyone. It's a secret."
"Cross my heart," Jimmy promised. "What did you do?"
"Punched a bully."
Jimmy raised an eyebrow. "They should be rewarding you for this."
"Tell me about it,"
Hoggie grumbled. "At least you'll get to have a little fun for a few days."
"I guess."
Hoggie frequently complained that having to go to school every day did not leave her much time for doing the things she really liked. But now that she had all the time in the world, she suddenly did not feel like doing anything at all.
"By the way, We finished till Eulenspiegel,"
Hoggie said, pulling the book out of her bag.
"Thank you for recommending it."
"My pleasure." Jim added Eulenspiegel to the stack of books on his cart. "Did you like it?"
"Yes, it was very good."
"Do you want another book? This one is excellent. I must have read it 100 times when I was a little boy." Jimmy picked up one of the books from the cart and handed it to Hoggie. Hoggie opened the book. On its very first page was a tiny picture of an open door with light streaming through it.
"Hey," Hoggie noted, "it's from Alexander Libri's collection."
"So it is," Jimmy confirmed. "You know about him?" Hoggie nodded.
"He is the architect who designed our library."
She studied the Latin inscription on the ribbon that curled over the door. This particular book was quite old, and the ex libris ink had worn out in places. The light streaming through the door was very faint, and a portion of the inscription had been erased completely. All Hoggie could read was the words Scientia and Vincit.
"What does this mean?"
Hoggie asked.
"Someone told me this once, but I don't remember any more."
"Knowledge wins," Jimmy translated from Latin. "Only this is not right. The original motto says, Scientia vincit metos, aperit januas, et dispellit tenebras. Knowledge conquers fears, opens doors, and dispels the darkness."
"Knowledge wins."
Suddenly Hoggie remembered where she had heard the Latin phrase before, or rather where she had seen it. Scientia vincit, knowledge wins, was written on a wall in Icarus's bookshop. Hoggie always thought that that was by itself an expression. But what if it was just the first 2 words of the architect's ex libris? Icarus's was as quiet as always, its only customer an elderly woman, wandering in the history section. Hoggie dashed past her to the end of fine arts aisle, where, on a dusty wall, a ribbon with the words Scientia vincit on it was painted. There seemed to be enough room on the wall behind the adjacent bookcase to fit the rest of the picture.
"Mr. Icarus,"
Hoggie called out to the shop owner,
"what is this picture you have here?"
Icarus Finn abandoned his seat and shuffled down the aisle, putting on his eyeglasses on the way.
"The mural," he said. "Oh, it has been here for a long time." "Do you remember what's on it? Is it by any chance a picture of a door?" "It may be," Icarus replied musingly. "Let us see." With Hoggie's help, the shop owner pushed the bookcase away from the wall, revealing the rest of the mural. A faded image of a slightly open door, with a wide beam of sunlight gushing through the opening. Written on the ribbon above the door was the phrase, Scientia vincit metos, aperit januas, et dispellit tenebras. The mural was exactly like the architect's ex libris. "Oh, yes," Icarus said. "I remember now. It is the motto of the Society of Saint Jerome. My father was a member." "What sort of society was it?" Icarus took out his handkerchief and wiped the years of dust off the painted ribbon. "I don't know if it's true, but my father once told me that the Society of Saint Jerome was founded by the librarians of the Royal Library of Alexandria." "No way!" Hoggie was stunned. "The one in ancient Egypt? The one that burnt down?" Icarus nodded. "The burning of the library was exactly why the society was founded, although at the time it was called the Alexandrian Brotherhood. The Brotherhood rescued some of the most precious books from the burning library and hid them in a safe place. Later, when it became clear that the library would not be restored, they smuggled the books out of Egypt." "And then what happened?" "They settled in a small town in Italy. There they continued to take care of the library, making it available to scholars, and expanding it through the purchase of new books. And after the members of the original Alexandrian Brotherhood died, their children continued this work.
How did they come to be the Society of Saint Jerome?
Ah, that is, perhaps, the most interesting part of the Society's history.
Icarus lowered himself down on a nearby chair.
In the Middle Ages, some of the descendants of the Alexandrian Brotherhood formed the Order of Saint Jerome, Saint Jerome being, as you may know, the patron saint of librarians. It was an order just in the name because its members were not monks. In fact, they were not interested in religion at all. Their main concern was the preservation of books. At that time, there were several wars going on in Europe. Cities and castles were often destroyed and pillaged. Thousands of books were lost to looters. Thousands more perished in fires that were also quite common in medieval cities. Back then, books were still handwritten, and because writing them took so much time and effort, they frequently existed as a single copy, and when a book was lost, the knowledge it contained was lost as well, forever. That was what the members of the Order of Saint Jerome were concerned about, and so it became their mission to copy some of the most important literary works of their time and store them in a safe place. Later on, there was another problem: the Inquisition.
Hoggie nodded her understanding. She had already heard about that period in history, when the Catholic Church imprisoned, tortured, and even murdered thousands of people.
The books of Galileo and Copernicus, the papers of Ian Gus, Martin Luther, Thomas Mann, and other humanists were banned by the Pope. They were to be burned, and anyone caught reading or owning these books would be punished, sometimes by death. You can imagine, then, how brave it was of the members of the order to preserve the copies of some of these books for future generations.
Icarus took a pause, recalling the events of those long-gone days.
Later, still, in the 19th and 20th centuries, the order, which by then was referred to simply as the Society of Saint Jerome, raised money for the construction of public libraries.
He stopped his narrative, and Hoggie asked eagerly,
Does it still exist, the Society?
Oh, yes, it does. It will exist for as long as people have a desire to read. They still do a lot to support public libraries all over the world, and to provide books to those who need them most, the poor, the prisoners, as well as people living in the countries where the right to know the truth is denied to them.
Wow!
Hoggie said.
This is so cool. I wish I were a member of the Society of Saint Jerome.
But you can, Icarus said. Anyone can. The Order of Saint Jerome might have been a close-knit group in the times when reading certain books was a crime, and when people didn't know whom they could trust, but it isn't any more. Today, Saint Jerome's is open to everybody. Anyone can join. Students, secretaries, firemen, prime ministers, cab drivers, and even those who have neither jobs nor homes. The only conditions for the membership in the society are the passion for books and desire to share them with others.
It was very late when Hoggie finally left Icarus's. By then she had heard several more amazing stories of the Alexandrian Brotherhood and Order of Saint Jerome. Just near the end, she asked Icarus something that had been tickling her curiosity for some time.
Whatever became of the original book collection? The one from the Alexandrian Library. Does it still exist? Where is it?
Ah, that. Icarus rose and slowly walked back to the counter, tidying up the bookshelves on the way.
Well, a collection like that is too valuable to keep in one place. Too many villains would be tempted to lay their hands on it. For that reason, about 200 years ago, the original collection was broken into several smaller ones. The smaller collections were then entrusted to the guardians, the families of the original keepers of the Royal Library, who, over the years, have dispersed all over the world.
Hoggie recalled suddenly that Alexander Libri's family had come to England from Italy, and that they had brought a large collection of books with them. Here is an interesting coincidence, she thought. Meanwhile, Icarus carried on.
So, if you ever wanted to see all of the books of the original collection, you would have to do quite a bit of travelling. Although, he added, these days it may be difficult to find the places where the collections are kept.
Why is that?
To ward off book thieves, Icarus explained, and believe me, there are plenty of those around. Still, theft is not even the worst thing that can happen to a book collection. I remember my father telling me about the Vincenzas, a family of the guardians that lived in the Italian city of Bologna in the 19th century. Their part of the collection contained the works of Isaac Newton and other early scientists, who, for the first time in the history of men, tried to explain the world with the help of physics and mathematics. One day, a religious fanatic, who found such books offensive, broke into the Vincenzas' library and set it on fire. Most of the collection was lost, and many of the Vincenza family perished in that fire. And just recently, someone has been burgling the homes of the guardians. Things have been so bad that last year the representatives of the families had to gather together to discuss what they could do to protect themselves from the book thieves.
What did the thieves steal?
Apparently, nothing.
Well, if they didn't steal anything, why was everybody so worried?
Icarus shrugged. Perhaps the guardians were concerned about what the thieves were after, what they had not yet found.
Do you know what it was?
Icarus wrinkled his forehead.
There were rumours of some very old and rare book, very unusual book at that, so unusual that, as people said, it could change one's life forever.
What's it called?
I'm afraid I don't know.
Hoggie remembered Catherine Libri telling them about the break-in. Nothing had been stolen from the Libri house either. Yet the burglars had rummaged through the architect's library. Could this, too, be a coincidence? Just as Hoggie was leaving the bookshop, Icarus asked, "By the way, why are you alone tonight? I don't think I've ever seen you without Scooter." Hoggie hesitated for a moment.
We broke up.
Why?
Hoggie rubbed the floorboard with the toe of her boot.
He just wasn't a very good friend.
Icarus raised an eyebrow.
Really? Well, he could have fooled me. The way the two of you shared everything, books, food, adventures, the way you talk for hours at a time, the way Scooter would always back you up in an argument, even when you were wrong.
Hoggie's heart ached at these wonderful memories of her time with Scooter.
He lied to me,
she said rather curtly.
Real friends don't lie to each other.
I see.
Icarus studied the girl's flushed face for a few moments.
In that case... Still,
he carried on after a few moments of a very awkward silence,
it couldn't have been all bad. I mean, you did choose Scooter to be your friend. There must have been something about him that was good.
Hoggie remembered very well the day she first met Scooter. She had just come to London to live with her aunt. She was new at school, and already she had had some unpleasant encounters that had made her wonder if she would ever fit at the Regent's Park. The teachers were treating her like a freak, because her last school was an institution for runaway youths. The bullies zoomed in on her because she was new and alone, and other children ignored her because she dressed poorly and did not have cool toys. Hoggie spent every recess in a window-sill on the school's top floor, reading. She was reading in her usual manner one morning, when a short, chubby boy climbed onto the window-sill next to her, took a few seconds to catch his breath, and then announced, "You must be new." Hoggie nodded. "I thought so," the boy said with satisfaction. "I wondered why I'd never seen you before."
"I haven't seen you either,"
Hoggie noted. "I was in France the last 3 months," the boy explained. "My mum lives there." "What are you reading?" the boy then asked. Hoggie showed the book to the boy. It was The Lord of the Rings, by J.R.R. Tolkien. The book had been a birthday present from Aunt Michelle, and it had instantly become one of Hoggie's favourite books. "Wow!" the boy said. "I love this book. Isn't it so much better than the movie?"
"1,000,000 times,"
Hoggie agreed. "Wow!" the boy repeated, returning the book. "I think you're the first person around here, outside myself, who has read Lord of the Rings. Most children here only read the books they have to read for class. When I tell them about the Lord of the Rings, or the Three Musketeers, or a Treasure Island, they just roll their eyes."
"I love the Treasure Island,"
Hoggie said.
"It's probably my favourite book. I've always wanted to find a treasure map and go looking for treasure. Not even for treasure, as much as for the fun of it, although treasure would be nice too."
"Me too," the boy exclaimed. "I'm Scot, by the way, but my parents just called me Scooter."
"Why Scooter?"
"Because I could run really fast when I was a kid. You know, like I was on a scooter." Hoggie smiled.
"When you were a kid? You are still a kid."
"Well, you know what I mean." Hoggie nodded, still smiling.
"My name is Hoggie. Actually, it's Penelope, but I hate it when people call me that."
"What are you doing after school?" Scooter then asked.
"I thought I'd go to the library."
"The city library? I love that place."
"Me too,"
Hoggie confessed.
"It's like the only place in London where I can sit for hours and no one will ever bother me."
"Do you want to go to the library together?" Scooter then asked. They spent that entire afternoon in the geography section, looking at the world's maps, sharing some of the stories about faraway places they had read about, and dreaming about their own voyages. And all this time, Scooter never once asked Hoggie what her parents did, or what kind of car they had, or how big their house was. He did not seem to care at all that she wore hand-me-downs and had bad grades. Hoggie told Scooter about her mother, what she remembered of her, her stays at the foster homes, and her life on the run. She also told him about the places she had seen and the books she had read, and Scooter hung on to her every word. Hoggie would never admit it to Icarus or anyone else, but she missed Scooter terribly.